It was April 17, 2010, when Michael Reed drove his weathered blue Subaru into Utah's Canyonlands National Park. He signed in at the Hans Flat Ranger Station around noon, smiling at the staff, mentioning he planned to spend 5 days solo hiking through the Maze District, one of the park's most remote and unforgiving regions. He carried a 70-liter backpack, a DSLR camera, topo maps, water filters, and a lightweight tent. To the rangers, he seemed prepared, calm, confident, experienced. But 5 days later, Michael didn't return. At first, no one noticed. Solo permits often stretched longer. Hikers sometimes extended stays without warning. It wasn't until April 26, when Michael's sister, Anna, called the ranger station that the alarm was raised. Michael hadn't answered his phone in days. His boss at the outdoor equipment shop in Boulder hadn't heard from him. His roommate reported his bed untouched, his cat unfed. Search and rescue arrived within 24 hours. Rangers scoured his planned route, Chimney Rock, the harvest scene, the dollhouse, and launched helicopters over the jagged labyrinth of canyons, mesas, and narrow slots. No signal was picked up from his phone or GPS beacon. Campers in the area hadn't seen another soul. The maze is aptly named, a brutal, isolated sprawl of sandstone corridors where landmarks repeat like tricks of the eye. The first days of the search were fueled by urgency. Michael was young, fit, smart. If anyone could survive a misstep, it was him. But days turned to weeks. Temperatures swung from sun-scorched days to freezing nights. Windstorms erased tracks. Flash floods washed out side canyons. When the official search was called off after 10 days, the only trace left behind was his parked Subaru, its windshield dust-frosted. A park map spread across the passenger seat, marked with neat red X's. Michael Reed had entered the maze and vanished without a whisper. To understand the weight of his disappearance, you had to know Michael. He was 28, a Colorado native with the lean build of someone always moving. His friends called him Reed. Not Michael, the kind of guy who preferred cliffs over couches, long drives over late nights. He worked at a Boulder outdoor shop, where he was known for fixing customers' gear on the spot, patching tents, rethreading climbing harnesses, swapping tips about the best remote trails. But behind that competence was a man in flux. Months before his disappearance, Michael had finalized a divorce. It was amicable, people said, but it rattled him. He moved out of the home they'd shared, gave up their adopted dog, and started spending more nights on the road, sleeping under the stars in Utah, Arizona, Wyoming. He filled his Instagram with stark black and white photos of canyons, rivers, and sky, each captioned with a single word: solitude, clarity, reset. Anna, his younger sister, remembered him as protective and restless. He was searching for something, she would later tell reporters. Not in a dangerous way, just searching. Michael wasn't reckless. He had a decade of backpacking experience, carried survival gear, and knew how to read a map. His coworkers described him as methodical, always triple-checking routes, leaving behind detailed plans. That's what made his disappearance so hard to explain. In the weeks after he was reported missing, online forums lit up with speculation. Some believed Michael had staged his own vanishing, tired of modern life. He'd walked off-grid. Others whispered of accidents, a slip into a hidden crevasse, a flash flood, or a canyon collapse. But none of it fit cleanly. The Michael they knew was a man looking for peace, not an ending. A man trying to rebuild after heartbreak, piecing together a life on trails that stretched into the horizon. And in April 2010, somewhere in the maze, that search, whatever it was, came to an abrupt, unsolved stop. There's a reason the Maze District is called what it is. Canyonlands National Park sprawls across southeastern Utah like a cracked, rust-colored puzzle. Of its 3 main districts, Island in the Sky, the Needles, and the Maze, the Maze is the most remote, the least visited, and the most dangerous. Few trails are marked, fewer still are maintained. For miles in every direction, sandstone fins jut skyward, canyons fork and refork, and dead-end chutes lead nowhere but deeper into labyrinths of stone. From above, The maze looks like a fingerprint stamped into the desert loops and whirls, endless and hypnotic. Rangers warn visitors, GPS signals often fail, maps are unreliable, water sources are scarce, and once you drop below the rim, radio contact is lost. The land has no sympathy for mistakes. Even seasoned hikers approach the maze with humility. It's not just the landscape, but the scale, the silence that deepens as you move away from the trailhead, the weight of knowing that in an emergency, help is days away, not hours. Flash floods carve new routes overnight. Windstorms erase tracks before you can retrace your steps. Rockfalls transform familiar passageways into sheer walls. It is, as one local put it, the place you go when you want to get small. Michael Reed wasn't naive to any of this. His marked map showed careful planning, a loop through Chimney Rock, the harvest scene, a camp at the dollhouse, then back out past the land of standing rocks. But in a region where 1,000-year-old petroglyphs decorate hidden canyon walls, even the best-laid plans can dissolve. What draws people to the maze, its isolation, its untouched beauty, its haunting silence, is exactly what makes it a perfect trap. Once you enter, the land swallows you whole, indifferent to your preparation, your intentions, or your quiet hope that this time you'll be the one to find your way through. Michael entered the maze on April 17, 2010. 8 years later, only his gear would come back out. The Hans Flat Ranger Station isn't much a squat, weathered building perched at the edge of nowhere. No cell signal, no electricity, no running water, just a couple of rangers, a radio, and the vastness of the maze stretching southward. Michael pulled in just before noon. Ranger notes later confirmed the interaction. A solo hiker, late 20s, Colorado plates, polite, relaxed. He signed the backcountry permit log, marked his intended route, and estimated 5 days in the maze. He asked a few questions about water sources, bought a printed topo map, and made a small joke about not needing rescue. It wasn't bravado, more the casual confidence of someone who knew the risks but believed he was prepared. There was nothing to suggest he wouldn't come back. Hans Flat was the last place anyone saw Michael Reed alive. After he drove south toward the Flint Trail switchbacks, his Subaru would sit undisturbed for weeks. The permit date would come and go. Days passed before the Rangers thought much of it after all. Hikers extended trips all the time. Maybe he'd looped farther west or linked up with another party. Maybe he was just out of range. It wasn't until Michael's sister called from Colorado that anyone raised the alarm. By then, it had been 9 days. Rangers hiked to the dollhouse, flew choppers over Chimney Rock, sent out ground teams along every spur Michael had marked. His tracks were faint, scattered, sometimes overlapping those of earlier hikers or vanishing altogether in slick rock washes. No tent, no gear cache, no sign of distress, just absence. For the Rangers at Hans Flat, the permit book became a kind of quiet memorial. Michael's neat handwriting, the planned dates, the looped initials, a snapshot of a man on the edge of something vast. He had walked out of the station and into one of the most unforgiving landscapes on Earth, and he had never walked back. The call came in on April 26, 9 days after Michael Reed was supposed to check out. His sister Anna had been trying to reach him for days, texts, calls, voicemails that spiraled from casual check-ins to anxious, pleading messages. Michael's boss at the Boulder outdoor shop hadn't seen him since he left. His roommate reported that the apartment looked untouched, the cat sitter hadn't heard anything, and the few friends who knew about the trip were getting worried. Anna called the Hans Flat Ranger Station. At first, the Rangers weren't alarmed. It wasn't unusual for backcountry hikers to extend a trip, especially in a place like the maze, where timing was flexible and communication was almost impossible. But as Anna explained Michael's routine, how careful he was, how he always checked in after trips, how he had planned to be back at work 3 days ago, a quiet shift happened. The Rangers pulled Michael's permit log. They radioed out to check nearby trailheads. They scanned their notes for any reports of solo hikers seen on the return loop. Nothing. By nightfall, a search team had been assembled. April 27 dawn. The first helicopter lifted off, sweeping low over Chimney Rock, the land of standing rocks, and the deep gorges south of the dollhouse. Ground teams followed on foot, tracing the rough paths Michael had marked, looking for footprints, campfire rings, water bottle caps, anything. Anna flew in from Colorado the next day. She stood at Hans Flat, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the horizon, waiting for news. She was sure they'd find him, sure it was just a wrong turn, a minor injury, a night gone cold but survivable. Michael was tough. He knew what he was doing. But even on the first day, some of the rangers knew. They'd seen this before, and in the maze, missing had a way of sliding too easily into gone. By the second day, the search expanded. More helicopters were called in, thudding low over the canyons, their shadows rippling across stone. Search and rescue teams arrived from Moab, Salt Lake, and Grand Junction. Dog teams were flown in, their handlers carefully lowering them by winch onto high mesas and narrow ledges. The maze swallowed them all. The landscape worked against them at every turn. Temperatures swung wildly, scorching heat by day, near freezing cold at night. Windstorms erased tracks in hours. Flash floods rerouted washes and buried possible clues under tons of rock and mud. The canyons folded in on themselves, a labyrinth of blind corners, dead ends, and slot crevices just wide enough to catch a foot or a body. For 10 days they searched. They checked Michael's planned campsites, mapped his last known route, expanded outward in radiating grids. Rangers rappelled into side canyons. Helicopters scanned for fresh disturbances in the sand, emergency signal mirrors, scraps of fabric. They called his name into the stillness. Nothing answered. Anna stayed near Hans Flat, gripping a paper cup of coffee, eyes red, voice hoarse. She spoke to search leads every night, clinging to updates, asking about the smallest details. Had they checked below Chimney Rock's west face? Had anyone looked near Shot Canyon? Could he have reached the river? But after 10 days, the pattern was clear. No camp, no gear, no footprints, no signal. Just a lone Subaru gathering dust, a backcountry permit folded under plexiglass, and a family standing at the edge of one of the most unforgiving places in North America waiting for a son, a brother, a man who had vanished as if the desert had taken him whole. Michael wasn't a novice. His friends and coworkers were quick to remind reporters of that in the weeks after his disappearance. He was the guy they called when gear failed mid-expedition, the one who patched up torn rain shells with duct tape and a lighter, the one who insisted on doing pack shakedowns before heading out. When Michael set off into the maze, he carried everything a smart solo hiker would: a 70-liter pack loaded with a 2-person ultralight tent, a down sleeping bag rated to 20 degrees Faust, a water filter, a collapsible 5-liter bladder, a first aid kit, backup iodine tablets, a Garmin GPS unit, topo maps folded with precision, a compass, a knife, and a lightweight stove. And his camera, a well-worn Nikon DSLR with 2 extra batteries and a pouch of memory cards. He'd left no note about trouble, no sign he'd been in over his head. His Instagram posts in the days before were filled with excitement, images of towering red walls, captioned simply, "Finally." That was the heart of the mystery. Experienced hikers can and do make mistakes, but Michael wasn't reckless. He was a systems guy. He left detailed itineraries. He carried redundancies. His coworkers said he'd memorized the leave no trace principles like gospel. His family called him cautious, sometimes frustratingly so. Which is why, when his pack wasn't found, when his tent didn't turn up collapsed or torn, when his camera wasn't recovered in a sidewash or ledge, search teams started to wonder if something else had happened. It wasn't just a fall. It wasn't just heat stroke or bad water. It was as if he'd stepped off the map entirely and taken his gear with him. In the shadowed corners of the maze, locals talk in low voices about disappearances. The land has a reputation, not just for difficulty, but for vanishing acts. Rangers keep unofficial tallies: a lone hiker from Nevada in '88, a pair of climbers in '97, an ultrarunner last seen in 2004. Some were found, some weren't. One outfitter in Moab remembered guiding a party through Horse Canyon and hearing something odd, a faint echo of footsteps that didn't belong to anyone in his group. Another old-timer spoke of finding weathered gear stashed under an overhang, a sleeping pad, a rusted canteen placed so deliberately it was as if someone intended to come back but never did. The maze, they say, swallows things. It's not malevolent, not exactly. It's just vast and patient and utterly indifferent. A place where landmarks double back on themselves, where you can walk in circles for days without realizing it, where a wrong turn means a plunge into a crevice no one knows to search. When Michael disappeared, the stories resurfaced. People wondered aloud if the maze had claimed another. Not because of ghosts, not because of curses, but because that's what the maze does. It's a place that demands respect, and sometimes, even when you give it everything you have, it takes more. Michael's name joined a quiet litany, a list of people who had underestimated or simply crossed an invisible line in the desert. And once you cross it, there's no guarantee you'll come back. As the weeks stretched into months, what filled the silence around Michael's disappearance were theories. Some were straightforward. Maybe he fell. The maze is littered with narrow ledges, crumbling rims, sudden drops masked by loose sand. A misstep, a slip at night, a patch of rain-polished rock, and Michael could have vanished into a slot or ravine so deep no helicopter scan would ever catch it. One ranger called it death by inches. No drama, no sign, just gone. Others wondered about the weather. That week in April had seen unseasonably high temperatures, daytime highs brushing 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and nights dipping into the 30s. Dehydration creeps faster at altitude. Heat exhaustion can turn fatal long before you realize you're in trouble. Did Michael run out of water? Did he push too far, trying to reach a spring or cache? But not all the speculation was so clean. Some whispered about foul play. The maze, after all, is a place where you can hide things or people you never want found. There were rumors, always vague, of illegal camps, backcountry squatters, shadowy figures near the river. Others fixated on the fact that Michael was alone. Did he meet someone out there? Was there a confrontation? And then came the darker possibility. Maybe Michael didn't want to be found. His recent divorce, his increasingly solitary trips, the tone of his social posts, solitude, clarity, reset, all fed online speculation that he'd staged his own disappearance, walked away from his life, and slipped into a new one somewhere else. His family dismissed the idea. His friends rejected it outright. But when someone vanishes without a trace, imagination rushes in to fill the gaps. And Michael's case offered nothing but gaps. In the center of the uncertainty stood Anna. She was 26 when Michael disappeared, a nurse in Denver, younger by 2 years but always the steady one. When their parents passed away in a car accident a decade earlier, it was Anna who had helped Michael keep the house afloat. Anna who made sure the bills got paid. Anna who picked up the pieces when his marriage ended. Now she found herself standing in front of TV cameras, reading from a shaking paper. "We are asking for any information, any sighting, anything at all." She called the Rangers daily. She printed flyers. She drove to Moab and retraced his planned route, standing at the edge of trailheads, calling his name into the dry wind. Anna refused to accept the word lost. She talked to searchers about revisiting certain canyons, about bringing in specialized dog teams. She scoured GPS forums, reading about failures and black spots. She connected with other families who had missing hikers, trading notes, pooling resources. The rest of the world moved on. News cycles spun forward. Headlines faded. But Anna stayed. She became the family's voice, the advocate, the memory keeper. In interviews, she would say, "Michael's out there somewhere." In quieter moments, she confessed to friends, "I just want him home, whatever that means." Every birthday, every holiday, every missed call that might have been him, Anna carried it all. Because until you have a body, you don't have an ending. And until you have an ending, hope clings to you like a second skin. The search officially ended in May 2010. By then, the helicopters were grounded. The SAR teams had gone home. The Rangers at Hans Flat had closed Michael's file and returned to the steady rhythm of permits, maps, and lost hikers who, unlike Michael, always came back. But for Anna, the years blurred into a long, hollow waiting. She kept a box in her apartment marked Michael. Inside were his last postcards, a worn trail map, and a USB stick with every news clip she could find. For the first year, she called the park regularly, checking for any update, then monthly, then only on anniversaries. The world around her shifted. New rangers cycled through Hans Flat. Moab's outfitter shops swapped owners. Outdoor blogs that once covered Michael's story drifted on to new headlines: missing climbers in Patagonia, vanished skiers in Alaska, kayakers lost at sea. The maze, too, moved on. Flash floods swept through slot canyons, recarving old paths. Rockfalls shifted ledges. Time smoothed away what little evidence had once been there. Anna tried to rebuild. She worked long hours at the hospital. She kept in touch with Michael's friends, his ex, even his old co-workers, a fragile thread holding his memory in place. But she knew, even if no one said it aloud, what people thought, that it was time to let go. But how do you let go when there's no grave, no farewell, no final word? By 2018, Michael had been gone 8 years. Anna still marked his birthday. She still answered unknown calls with a tight, flickering hope. And then, that summer, a call came not from a stranger, but from a park ranger at Hans Flat. They had news. It was pure accident. 2 climbers, Sam Torres and Mark Elliott, were exploring an unnamed ravine west of the Land of Standing Rocks. The area wasn't on any official trail map. Most hikers never went near it. The terrain was too steep, too broken, too easy to get into, and impossible to climb back out without gear. Sam spotted it first, something unnatural, wedged into the shadow of a sandstone wall, half covered by dust and fallen brush. A backpack. Sun-bleached, weather-worn, the fabric peeling in places like dry skin, but unmistakably a pack, and not one from last season or even the last few years. Inside, they found the remnants of what had once been state-of-the-art gear: an old Garmin GPS, corroded at the seams, a Nikon DSLR, body cracked but intact, a coil of climbing rope stiff with age, a tangle of faded maps, their corners curling like dead leaves. And when they brought it to the rangers, when they ran the serial numbers, when they pulled up the missing persons report, it all pointed to one name: Michael Reed. The maze had given something back. But what it meant and what it left unsaid was only the start of the next mystery. The ravine had no name. It wasn't marked on tourist maps or backcountry guides, not even on the detailed topo charts Michael had carried. Locals called it the Break, a narrow slash in the sandstone, cut deep by flash floods over millennia, hidden in the folds west of the Land of Standing Rocks. From above, it was almost invisible. The rim blended seamlessly with the surrounding terrain, the descent sharp and sudden, the kind of drop-off that caught no shadow at noon and no footprint in sand. To stumble across it, you had to wander far off the established routes, beyond where most hikers, even experienced ones, dared to go. Sam Torres and Mark Elliott hadn't planned to go that far, but that summer, the pair had been pushing deeper into the maze than most, chasing unclimbed spires and rarely seen slot canyons. Their GPS marked them on unbroken ground, their progress slow, every step tested. It was Mark who noticed the change in the air, that faint pull of cooler wind rising from somewhere it shouldn't. They backtracked, pushed through a stand of twisted juniper, and there it was, a narrow gash in the earth, its walls smooth and water, carved, its floor a maze within a maze. Standing at the edge, they both felt it, that hush, that shift. Like they were the first people in a very long time to stand there, or maybe not the first at all. At first, it was just a shape, half buried in red sand, lodged against a tumble of rockfall at the base of the ravine. Faint outlines softened by time, the curve of a pack's frame, the frayed edge of a shoulder strap, the ghost of something man-made in a landscape that swallowed such things whole. Mark reached it first, crouching low, fingers brushing away fine dust. It was a backpack, all right, sun-bleached, nearly white, the original color faded beyond guessing. The zipper teeth had fused together in places, the buckles cracked at the corners. Sand had sifted deep into the fabric, into the seams, into every hollow. But there were still details. A stitched logo, a patched corner, the faint, indelible marks of a life once carried. Inside, they found what time hadn't yet taken, a Nikon DSLR, the battery long dead but the memory card still inside, a GPS unit, corroded but intact, folded maps with routes marked in red, a battered journal, its pages fused together but the cover readable M. Reed. For 8 years, the desert had held this pack in its quiet grip, hidden where no one thought to look. And now, it was coming home. The camera was heavier than it looked. When the Rangers received Michael's pack from Sam and Mark, they handled it carefully, gloves on, brushing away years of grit. The Nikon was battered, the grip worn smooth, the body chipped at the corners, the lens fogged and cracked. But it was the memory card that mattered. Against all odds, it was intact. They sent it to a lab in Salt Lake, hoping, cautiously, that something could be salvaged. And when the call came, when the technician confirmed they had recovered images, Anna flew out the next day. The photos were a kind of breadcrumb trail. They started like any hiking album, wide shots of sunrise over sandstone, delicate blooms of desert paintbrush, Michael's boots propped near his tent, coffee in a battered enamel cup. There were selfies too, Michael smiling, squinting into the light, his expression open, tired, alive. Then came the later photos. The canyons deepened, the terrain sharpened. Michael's shots narrowed, focused on rock formations, a trickle of water in a dry wash, the twisted pattern of driftwood caught between boulders. The last handful were stranger, a narrow ledge framed in shadow, the curve of the ravine's rim, a final selfie. In that last image, Michael's face filled the frame, eyes squinting, jaw tight, a faint smudge of sweat or dust on his cheek. Behind him, the rock walls pressed close, the light pale and thin. There was no note, no message, no staged farewell. Just the quiet record of a man moving deeper into a place no one else had been, camera in hand, until the trail simply stopped. The discovery changed everything. Within days, Rangers and SAR teams reassembled, not just from Hans Flat, but from across Utah and Colorado. The maze had been quiet for years, but now, with Michael's gear recovered, they had a focus point, a reason to believe more could be found. They launched a coordinated effort: ground teams, climbers, dogs, helicopters. The ravine was mapped in sections, GPS grids laid over paper charts. Climbers dropped into narrow slots. Drones scanned inaccessible shelves. Every crevice, every side canyon, every pocket of brush and stone was checked. Anna waited at Hans Flat again, this time with a different kind of ache, not for a rescue, but for remains. For something, anything, that could answer the question that had haunted 8 long years. But the maze lived up to its name. For all their effort, the teams found only fragments, scraps of fabric, a rusted carabiner, the partial imprint of a boot sole half, swallowed by a rockfall. The ravine was deeper than expected, its floor choked with debris, its walls eroded into false paths and dead ends. The land had held Michael's pack, but it kept the rest. And by the end of the week, the teams pulled back, the radio calls fell quiet, and Anna sat alone once more, staring south, into the maze, into the place where her brother had disappeared and where some part of him still remained. The images were stunning. When the lab emailed over the recovered files, Anna sat in the ranger station with 2 park officials, scrolling through each one slowly, carefully, as if they might dissolve if touched too quickly. The first photos were familiar landscapes of the maze under morning light, jagged silhouettes against a rising sun, Michael's boots at the edge of an overlook. His eye was sharp. Even in the harshest terrain, he found beauty. The curve of a canyon wall, the wind-scoured pattern in sand, the delicate bloom of a cactus flower in a crack of stone. Mixed among them were moments of himself, a selfie at camp, headlamp strapped across his forehead, a photo of his shadow stretching long across the desert floor, a faint smile caught in reflection on his water bottle. Then, The photos changed. The terrain grew tighter, the canyon walls pressed closer, his framing narrowed images of narrow ledges, overhanging stone, the glint of water pooled in dark rock. The light shifted, cooler, paler, as if he was descending farther than planned. The last photo was a selfie, but it felt different. Michael's face filled the frame, closer, less composed. His skin was sunburned, his hair matted, a thin line of dust traced across his cheek. Behind him, the canyon flared out in pale light, a narrow shelf at his shoulder, the walls jagged and steep. There were no more images after that. No sign of panic, no blurred shots, no farewell. Just the camera, abandoned where his pack was left, and the faint, aching record of a journey into one of the most unforgiving places on Earth, a journey that simply stopped. The search teams worked outward from the ravine, fanning into the canyons like spokes on a wheel. It didn't take long before they began finding pieces. First, a torn fragment of synthetic fabric, possibly from a jacket caught in a tangle of roots, sun-bleached and frayed. Then, further down, a half-crushed water bottle, its plastic brittle from years of heat and cold, wedged between two boulders. Near the base of a side canyon, a paper scrap, water-damaged beyond legibility, but unmistakably part of a topo map, edges marked with faint red ink. And then, faintest of all, a partial track, the indentation of a boot heel softened by time, nearly erased by wind and rain. The trackers circled it quietly. They measured, photographed, logged. It was too faint to follow, too old to trust fully. But for Anna, when they showed her the photo, it felt like a thread, thin and fragile, pulled from the earth itself. It wasn't enough to solve anything, not yet. But it was proof that somewhere, at some point, Michael had passed that way, still moving, still searching, still alive. Speculation came quietly at first. Among the rangers and search teams, no one wanted to say it outright. But after the gear was recovered, after the photos were reviewed, after the faint boot print was marked and measured, a theory began to form, whispered at first, then spoken aloud. Maybe Michael fell. The ravine where his pack was found was treacherous. Sheer drop-offs hidden by sand, false ledges undercut by erosion, cracks that widened just enough to swallow a man whole. From above, they were almost invisible shadows at midday, mere slits at dusk. The photos hinted at risk. In his last images, the narrow shelf behind Michael's shoulder seemed to taper to nothing, the rock fractured, the margin for error razor-thin. One image showed a puddle of water near a ledge, perhaps the last water he'd found, perhaps the reason he pushed deeper. Searchers walked the rim, eyes scanning every break, every cleft. They dropped cameras on lines, lowered drones, peered into dark gaps that ran for 20, 30, 40 feet down. But the maze was merciless. Rocks shifted, flash floods buried openings, years of sand and stone collapsed in on themselves. Even if Michael had fallen, even if his body rested in some hidden pocket, the odds of recovery were painfully slim. Still, the idea clung to the investigation, a quiet ache behind every decision, that maybe the journey hadn't ended by choice. That maybe the desert hadn't taken him for his solitude, but simply for one missed step. The effort to piece together Michael's last movements became a project of its own. Maps were spread across ranger station tables, marked and remarked with red and yellow lines. The recovered photos were printed in high resolution, annotated with compass directions, sun angles, terrain markers. Topographers compared features in the images to known landmarks, matching curve to curve, shadow to shadow. They traced his planned route against where his gear was found. Chimney Rock, Dollhouse, Land of Standing Rocks, then west, off the marked paths, into the unnamed ravine. Why had he gone that way? Had he been following water? Seeking shade? Escaping something? Tracker teams tried to simulate his likely path, walking the terrain under similar conditions, estimating pace, ration use, fatigue. They consulted climbers and canyoneers, debating whether Michael had tried to descend into the ravine or had been forced there by accident or necessity. But every theory looped back into the same dead ends. Without more clues, without Michael, the picture remained a puzzle missing its center. A map with one last red line that simply stopped. In October 2018, Anna stood at the rim of the maze, staring into the land that had swallowed her brother. She hadn't been here in years. Back in 2010, she had come briefly during the first search, too stunned, too raw, pacing the Hans Flat Ranger Station with a cup of bad coffee, waiting for news that never came. But now, 8 years later, with Michael's pack recovered, she was here not just to wait, she was here to walk. The Rangers hesitated at first. It wasn't standard to bring family into active search zones, especially in terrain like this. But Anna was gentle, insistent. She didn't want to be part of the formal team. She didn't want promises. She just wanted to see. They took her carefully, slowly, down into the ravine. She wore borrowed boots, a sun hat pulled low, a pack far too big for her frame. Step by step, she moved along the flagged path, eyes darting over every ledge, every brush of fabric caught on stone, every faint impression in the sand. The searchers walked ahead, working in silence. Anna trailed just behind, whispering sometimes Michael's name, half-formed prayers, apologies. At the base of the ravine, she stood where his pack had been found, placing her hand on the rock where time and weather had left nothing but faint stains of color. Later, when they returned to camp, a ranger asked softly why she wanted to come. Anna's answer was quiet. Because I needed to touch the place where he last stood. The maze is not just a place of stone, it is a place of movement. Flash floods tear through canyons with the violence of freight trains, scouring walls, uprooting trees, dragging boulders the size of cars. A dry wash can become a roaring river in minutes, and when the water recedes, it leaves behind a new landscape, sand shifted, ledges collapsed, trails gone. The wind is its own sculptor. It peels at the rock face, whips through narrow slots, polishes away footprints before they're half a day old. It stacks sand in soft drifts over cairns and scatters light debris miles from where it fell. Every year, freeze and thaw pull at the canyons, widening cracks, toppling ledges, reshaping edges that once held memories. For search teams, it's maddening. A marker set one day may be buried the next. A track found in the morning can vanish by dusk. For families like Anna's, it's heartbreak. Because the land does not just hide, it erases. It folds time into itself, tucks away evidence, and hums its indifferent song while those left behind try, over and over, to follow paths that no longer exist. The maze has always attracted stories. Locals say it's the kind of place that holds on to things, not just rocks and bones, but whispers, footsteps, memories. Around Moab and the edge towns, old-timers share stories in low voices over gas station counters and campfires, of voices carried on canyon winds, of shadows that flicker at dusk where no human stands, of flickering headlamps glimpsed from a distance only to vanish when approached. A river guide once spoke of hearing laughter echoing through a side canyon, high and thin, though no one was camped for miles. A ranger recalled the faint tap-tap-tap of footsteps on slick rock behind him, turning and seeing only emptiness. Hikers have told of finding gear too new to belong to the old-timers, too weathered to belong to the living. Some believe the maze remembers. Disappearing here isn't rare, it's part of the land's history. Since the early days of ranchers and prospectors, people have gone missing in these canyons. Some turn up years later, alive or dead. Some are never seen again. Michael's name became another in the quiet catalog, another story people told when the sun dipped low and the wind picked up. Not as a ghost exactly, but as a kind of presence. The young man who walked into the maze and never walked back out. By the end of the 2018 recovery effort, even the most determined searchers faced a hard truth. Some places cannot be searched. They mapped everything they could, the ravine, the offshoots, the narrow slots, the scree slopes where Michael might have tried to climb or descend. They sent drones over blind drops, cameras on lines into cracks, and they swept the surrounding canyons as far as daylight and endurance allowed. But the maze is vast. It's not just size, it's the layers. Shelves collapse into fissures too small to squeeze through but deep enough to bury. Rockfalls create false floors. Flash floods erase signs, create new traps, fill hollow pockets with tons of debris. There are places where no boot can stand, no rope can reach, no eye can see. The search teams gathered one last time at Hans Flat. They stood in a loose circle, dusty, tired, silent. They hadn't given up, but they had to stop. Because the maze wasn't just a landscape. It was, in the end, the thing no one could outwalk, a place where some stories simply stay buried, forever unfindable. The media wave hit fast. When word broke that Michael Reed's pack had been recovered after 8 years in the maze, national outlets picked it up. Headlines flashed across screens. Backpacker's gear, found in Utah Canyonlands after nearly a decade. Cold case reopened. The mystery of Michael Reed. Anna found herself swept into interviews she never expected. She sat under bright lights on morning shows, her hands folded tightly in her lap, recounting her brother's story for audiences who had never heard his name. She spoke on podcasts, her voice steady even when her chest clenched tight, describing the maze, the search, the lingering hope. Old photos circulated: Michael smiling at a trailhead, Michael waist-deep in a river crossing, Michael perched on a rock ledge, camera in hand. The narrative shaped itself. The experienced outdoorsman who vanished, the sister who never stopped searching, the landscape too wild to be tamed. With the renewed attention came fresh leads. Emails poured in from hikers who believed they'd seen signs, from amateur detectives with theories, from people who had once crossed paths with Michael and now wondered if they had missed something crucial. A retired SAR volunteer reached out, offering to comb old search grids. An engineer sent drone scans of previously unsearched canyons. For a brief moment, it felt like momentum. But the maze stayed silent. No new trace appeared. No breakthrough came. And soon, as all stories do, the media cycle moved on, fading into other headlines, other mysteries, other faces on missing posters. For Anna, the return home was quieter than she expected. The cameras left. The interviews ended. The emails slowed. And she sat alone in her Denver apartment, staring at the small shelf that had become her shrine. A photo of Michael, his journal, the memory card now safely backed up, a small bottle of sand she had scooped from the ravine floor. She thought about grief, about how it doesn't end but reshapes itself, folding into the quiet corners of a life you still have to live. There were days she accepted Michael was gone, truly gone. There were nights she found herself glancing at her phone, imagining his name lighting up, just once. But more than anything, Anna came to understand the strange power of not knowing. Not every story has an ending, not every loss has a body, not every love has closure. What remained was memory, and memory was its own form of survival. She had not found Michael, but she had carried him through every year, every search, every impossible hope, and that, she realized, was its own kind of keeping. In the months after Michael's case resurfaced, something shifted quietly within the search and rescue world. Teams who had combed the maze began to share what they'd learned, not just about terrain and technique, but about people, about why someone as prepared as Michael could vanish without a trace. SAR veterans spoke of the psychology of getting lost, how even the most experienced hikers make critical errors under stress. One wrong turn becomes two, the map stops matching the land, panic overrides training. They described something called terminal burrowing, where a lost person, exhausted and disoriented, seeks shelter rather than signal, hiding under ledges or in caves, where searchers are least likely to find them. They talked about risk, how preparation isn't just gear and maps, but humility, about knowing when to turn back, when to conserve energy, when to sit still and wait. Michael had been prepared, but the land was bigger. For hikers planning trips into places like the maze, his story became a cautionary tale woven into briefings and workshops, check-ins, GPS beacons, backup beacons, clear itineraries left with family. Not just water, but water knowledge, where to find it, how to ration it. But even with all of that, the experts admitted something harder. There are places where the land wins, where nature is not cruel, only indifferent, and where the price of a single mistake is more than anyone can undo. The maze does not mourn. It does not hold funerals, mark graves, or speak the names of those who vanish into its labyrinth of stone. It has no voice but the wind, no memory but the faint scarring of flash floods and the shifting of red earth. And yet, in its silence, it remembers. It remembers in the weathered boot print sealed under a rockfall, in the rusted buckle lodged between two boulders, in the faint imprint of a sleeping pad flattened into sand. It remembers in the quiet, in the long stretches where no human sound has echoed for years, where the sun bakes the stone and the moon pulls at the chill, and nothing moves but the thin whine of wind through the cracks. For those who come to the maze, it offers beauty, vastness, solitude, and danger. It gives, and it takes. Michael Reed came here searching for something. Clarity, maybe. Reset, maybe. Or just the clean, hard quiet that the desert offers when the world feels too loud. He is not the first the maze has kept. He will not be the last. The land endures, indifferent, ancient, deadly, beautiful. And somewhere, folded into its labyrinth of stone and shadow, it carries the faintest trace of a man who once walked there and never came home. It was a quiet morning when Anna returned one last time. The search teams were gone. The helicopters, the dogs, the reporters, all gone. Just Anna, a ranger, and the long hush of the maze stretched around them. She walked slowly to the ravine's edge, the place where Michael's pack had been found. The rock was sun-bleached, the sand pale and soft, the silence so complete she could hear her own breath, hear the faint scratch of her boot against stone. She carried a small bundle in her hands, a photo of Michael, the one she loved best, laughing, head thrown back, eyes half shut against the sun. A folded note, written in her own careful hand. And a simple, flat stone she had carried from home. At the base of the ravine she crouched and began to stack. A stone cairn. Not tall, not grand. Just a modest human mark in a place that rarely allowed them. She placed the note under the top stone, tucked the photo just behind it, pressed her palm lightly against the final rock. "I miss you," she whispered. "I'm sorry I couldn't bring you home." The ranger waited respectfully a few steps back. When Anna was ready, they climbed out together, the morning light falling in thin ribbons over the sandstone. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The marker was there, small and defiant, holding space in a land that remembers nothing and everything. There are stories we tell to make sense of loss. We say he's out there somewhere, still walking. We say he found peace in the place he loved most. We say the desert holds its own, and someday it will give him back. But some stories don't end that way. Some stay open-ended, unfinished, trailing off like a boot print in sand just before the wind comes. They remain because the world is too big, too wild, too untamed to tie everything neatly. For Anna, and for others like her, the ache of that truth never quite leaves, but neither does the strange, stubborn light it carries the human instinct to search, to hope, to remember. We are creatures who mark trails, who leave cairns, who whisper names into the wind, knowing it may never answer. Michael's story doesn't end with a body, or a grave, or a final word. It ends here, with a sister, a stone, a silence. And the simple, enduring fact that some journeys continue not in the finding, but in the remembering. This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.